Okay, we'll get started. Perhaps if people up the back could probably move a bit closer, would be more cosy. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're standing today, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all other Aboriginal elders and people that may be here with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There are some Red Cross counsellors here if anybody requires any support, and you can just see one of the event staff if that's the case. Today's event is being filmed and photographed, so if you don't want to be photographed or filmed, please just see one of the event staff. And if you require first aid assistance, there'll be somebody here to help you. Again, see one of the event staff, and they're all wearing name tags. Now, we've received apologies from the Premier Daniel Andrews, former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, Deputy Premier James Merlino, Senator Rachel Siewert, Senator Gavin Marshall and others. And I should say, I'm Jo Fraser. I'm the Secretary of Arms. And it's a great honour for Arms and Origins to welcome you to this momentous occasion today. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Families and Children, Jenny Makakos, Lord Mayor Sally Capp, and former Premier Ted Baillieu, Lizzie Blanthorne MP, Sue Pennicue MP, Danielle Green MP, Senator Claire Moore, Senator Jed Carney, former MP Christine Campbell, former MP Robert Hudson, and artist Anne Ross. And I'd like to acknowledge representatives from the many organisations, government, NGOs, community and not-for-profits who have travelled with us and worked alongside us in our fight for recognition and legislative change. And of course, many members of Arms and Origins, many of whom have travelled from regional and interstate areas. And in particular, welcome to past chairs and life members, and to all of our friends and families. This is a very important occasion for those who've been affected by adoption. 18 months ago, Origins and Arms came together with a united vision, and with the help of Lizzie Blanthorne, member for Pascoe Vale, approached the Victorian Government for support. And they have been extraordinarily generous in facilitating this project. I'll just give you a picture of how the hour is going to unfold. We'll begin the event with a musical number. Then Mari Meggett, who is the founder of Arms, will speak on behalf of Arms and Origins, followed up by the unveiling of the sculpture and a speech from Minister Makakos. We will then invite anybody who wants to pick a stem of boronia from the vases and place it at the base of the artwork as a tribute to the way adoption has touched you or your family. The Lord Mayor Sally Capp will then speak, followed by an acknowledgement of the 6th anniversary of the Victorian State Apology for Past Adoption Practices. And then we'll take a short walk around there to Treasury Theatre for afternoon tea, supplied by the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, during which we'll be entertained with uplifting music by the Thornberries, which is a ukulele group. So I would like to introduce Annie Postorino, singing Since I Lost You, accompanied by Paul Postorino.
Seems in a moment your whole world can shatter. Like morning dreams, they just disappear. Like dust in your hand, falling to the floor. How can life ever be the same? 'Cause my heart pieces. Yes, my heart too easy to take too much for granted, but it's so, so hard to find the words to say. Like a castle in the sand, the water takes away. But how can life ever be the same? 'Cause my heart is broken in pieces. Yes, my heart is broken in pieces since you've been gone. Oh, now you'll never see, now you'll never know all the things I planned for you, things for you and me. Held your hand so tightly, I couldn't let it go. How can life ever be the same? 'Cause my heart is broken in pieces. Yes, my heart is broken in pieces. Yes, my heart is broken in pieces since I lost you. Since I lost you. Since I lost you.
Thank you to Annie and Paul. That was beautifully rendered. So ARMS Victoria was founded in 1982 by Mari Meggitt after holding a meeting of relinquishing mothers at the Second National Adoption Conference. Her courage and determination to help other women was the beginning of a journey of women speaking for ourselves. Elizabeth Edwards has been the convener of Origins Victoria since its foundation in 1998. She has tirelessly pursued the rights of mothers and adoptees through that organisation. Please welcome Mari Meggitt, who will speak on behalf of Mari and Elizabeth.
Elizabeth and I have made a new moment together, and we're really delighted that we've been able to come together as a group who've had similar experiences. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, custodians of the land on which we are gathered, and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also want to acknowledge the many, many Aboriginal women who had their children taken from them. I acknowledge the current and former members of Parliament and the Mayor of the City of Melbourne. I particularly welcome our friends and colleagues in the adoption movement and our families, for whom this day is so significant. As Jo said, this is a momentous occasion for ARMS and Origins in particular, who imagined this project into reality, and for all the mothers, sons and daughters, and those who experience the pain of being separated by adoption. It is momentous because it is a public testament to the profound loss and grief that is the lived experience of mothers. As important, it is an acknowledgement of our offspring who were taken from us. It is momentous because it has been provided by the Government of the State of Victoria, which, in doing so, acknowledged publicly the role played by it, the Church, and the community in taking our children from us and plunging us into irreconcilable grief. Sorry, sort of wait. In this space being created, we have been given a place that tells the world that we are believed. It is a space that holds both us and our sons and daughters in the world, not just inside ourselves. It is real, it is tangible, It takes our internal journey and marks out a place for it. We left those hospitals that held our children without a photo, without a lock of hair or a birth certificate, nothing external to ourselves that confirmed that we had had a child and that we were mothers. This place, with this piece of art, provides us with something more than just a lock of hair. It confirms the truth of our experience, and it holds that as a testimony to the world. But to understand how extraordinary it is to be standing here today, I need to give you a snapshot of the journey that led us here. The history of adoption is truly a dark one, punctuated by lies, manipulation, secrecy, cruel words, and illegal actions. First legislated at the turn of the 20th century, adoption took flight in the 1950s, when the stain of illegitimacy provided a basis for shocking discrimination against us and our children. But it was the 1964 Uniform Adoption Act, implemented across Australia, that enshrined the concept of adoption secrecy and the ideal of a mother who put it all behind her, and in doing so made a child who was unfettered by connection to its family of origin available for an infertile married couple. The shame and the silence that surrounded pregnancy out of wedlock meant that we were seen as unfit mothers. The practice of closed adoption was seen as the solution, where the birth identities of adopted children were erased. Shocking practices resulted from this ideal of expunging the unfit mother. A system was built up that ensured that girls and young women were actively punished for their immorality. The foremost authority on unmarried mothers in the post-war period, Leontine Young, a social worker, contended that, and a psychologist, contended that non-marital pregnancy expressed deep neuroses that could only be fixed by doing what the mother most deeply and unconsciously needed, which was to have her child taken from her. The chief obstetrician at the Royal Women's Hospital, Don Lawson, addressing the medical fraternity in the 1960s when presenting the Featherston Lecture, stated that as you walk through the nursery, you can smell the adultery. He went on to say, the rule of thumb is, when in doubt, don't. But I say, when it comes to adoption, do. The last thing an obstetrician needs to concern himself with is the law when it comes to adoption. Given these attitudes, it's not hard to see how punitive practices developed. Without pain medication, medical neglect and malpractice, drugging mothers during the labour and then telling them that their baby had been stillborn, signing consent forms on behalf of mothers, and imposing a wholesale denial of their rights prior to the signing of consent. When we leap 20 years into the early 1970s, society was changing, but adoption practices were not. In the 12-year period from 1968 to 1980, it is conservatively estimated that 35,000 mothers, Australian mothers, 90% of whom were under 20, had their child taken from them. I chose that time frame because my child was taken from me in 1972, the year of the highest number of adoptions, just under 10,000 in 1 year. It is still difficult to identify research that examines the issues of consent and the contested nature of what voluntary relinquishment might look like, given the social attitudes, historical social work practices, and the views held about single mothers, ex-nuptial children, and illegitimacy. From my own experience and the many hundreds of mothers I have spoken to over my years in arms, and from what we know now from the research that has been done, these were not voluntary relinquishments. Let us picture it. My lovely niece, just 3 weeks ago, went to hospital and gave birth to a lovely little boy. Imagine, the babe crowns, comes into the world in that last rush. He's cleaned, the umbilical cord is cut, and suddenly he's whisked away, perhaps by a nurse. Whoever it was gone, not returned. The shock is devastating. The fear overtakes. A terrible trauma unfolds, one that mother and babe are likely not to recover from. If that had happened 3 weeks ago, it would be written up in all the newspapers. The police would be notified, and a search would be undertaken. But that, thank God, did not happen 3 weeks ago. It happened in 1972 to me. Over days I asked to have my baby. I pleaded, cried, screamed, insisted. But someone had taken that baby and had no intention of returning him to me. Mothers say their child was kidnapped. Others say abducted. And it's not hard to accept that that is how it feels. However, a kidnapping is generally a random event that happens to some desperately unfortunate family like Madeleine McCann, the little English girl who disappeared in Portugal. What we know is that my child was taken from me immediately after his birth, and it was not random. And I was only one of another 9,742 girls and young women to whom it would happen in 1972, and only one of more than 100,000 in Australia to whom it either had happened or would happen. Clearly, it was not a voluntary relinquishment. The crime of adoption is that it was systemic. A state-operated, comprehensive, planned and controlled approach set out by hospitals, adoption agencies and social workers, underpinned by government legislation and supported by the moral imperatives of the Church. It was a social policy of great moral convenience, because by design it enabled properly married but infertile couples to become a family. And the fact that it was at the expense of my family was irrelevant, because I was unfit to be a mother and I didn't deserve to have a child. I, like so many mothers, was broken by this experience. Research tells us that there is a long-term negative impact on mothers since the pregnancy of morbid, unresolved grief, presenting as psychological trauma or pathological grief reactions that have failed to resolve. What does that mean for our lived experience as mothers, who were not mothers in the eyes of the world? We know that morbid grief reactions differ only in intensity and duration from the normal grief response, but our reactions tend to be internalised. So, sadness, anger, guilt, agonising self-reproach, anxiety, loneliness, depression are all ongoing aspects of our journey post-adoption. There is a cluster of circumstances that research tells us are likely determinants of pathological grief. The loss being socially stigmatised and therefore accompanied by shame, grief, guilt, and the loss of self-esteem. External events preventing the expression of the feelings of loss. Uncertainty about the reality of the loss, because of course my child was not dead. Normal, expected mourning being absent and unacknowledged. And of course, mourning rituals were completely absent. Those determinants are what were systemically implemented by adoption agencies and hospitals on behalf of our government and supported by social workers, families and society. So how did we get here today, to this place of truth? It has been a really long journey, contributed to by so many, and it was led by the self-help movement in Victoria. In 1979, I joined the Council for the Single Mother and Her Child, who had by then, with Jigsaw, organised 2 national conferences on adoption in 1976 and 78, and Victoria had produced a seminal Adoption Legislation Review Committee report, members of whom were from Jigsaw and the Single Mothers Council. I am ever grateful to the founding members of that organisation, Rosemary West and Tricia Harper, who helped me understand that to have truly chosen to have my son adopted, I would have needed a choice, more than one option. And the truth was that not only was there no choice, it was intended that way. It was the 1982 adoption conference where our organisation, then called the Association of Relinquishing Mothers, came into being. Until that time, social workers and hospital and adoption staff, agency staff, spoke on our behalf, claiming that we had been promised secrecy and that we didn't want our secret to be revealed, that we certainly didn't want our lives disrupted by our sons and daughters contacting us, and that we had moved on, forgotten about that chapter in our lives. Our voices were resounding in saying that that was simply not true. We joined with the adoptee movement, who were rightly arguing that they were entitled to know their origins. The turning of the tide came in 1984 when, under the stewardship of Minister Pauline Toner, the Labor government introduced groundbreaking legislation allowing adopted persons access to identifying information about their families of origin, and mothers access to non-identifying information and the opportunity to contact their offspring in a process mediated by adoption agencies. There was considerable work to be done in the years following the legislation, driving the momentum to ensure that all states in Australia legislated for identifying information, continuing to argue that in Victoria we mothers had a right to know the identity of our offspring and for that to be legislated, and of course the ongoing task of educating the community and supporting mothers emerging from the secrecy that had been imposed upon them. In that time, another 20 years had passed, and another first had been achieved. Adoptees Pauline Lee and Margaret Campy and I established the VANISH, the Victorian Adoption Network for Information and Self-Help, a state-funded self-help search and support organisation for the three parties to adoption, which is today still doing successful, essential work finding and connecting families in the adoption community. In 1998, a new mother group, Origins, was set up, and it provided the impetus for the next major shift in social policy thinking. Of great assistance in those difficult years was their good friend Christine Campbell, who, as a Member of Parliament and a Minister, made many efforts for our cause. Origins worked assiduously to achieve a Commonwealth Senate inquiry into the impact of forced adoption policy and practices, and its report was delivered in February of 2012. It, like the ALRC and the process leading up to the 1984 legislation, called for public submissions and held public hearings, critical factors in bringing public attention to the issue and influencing opinion. That report recommended, among other things, the need for full apologies to be offered to mothers, and it named in stark terms the shocking impact of the practice of forced adoption, using the voices and stories provided by us, and in doing so registered that we were believed. Concurrently, significant national research on past adoption practices was being undertaken and then reported on by the Australian Institute of Family Studies under the directorship of Daryl Higgins. The combination of this explosive Senate inquiry, backed by this research findings, led to all states, the ACT and the Commonwealth, to offer an apology to we mothers and our sons and daughters for these past systemic practices. 2012 was a very big year for us and our offspring. The Victorian Liberal government under Ted Baillieu apologised to us, our offspring and the fathers for the policies that had led to our separation, and finally committed to giving us the right to identifying information about our offspring. It was such a relief after those many years of struggle. Victoria had been the first state in Australia to legislate rights for adoptees, and it was the last to give them to us. Sadly, it came with a huge sting in the tail, allowing for a veto to be placed by any adopted person who did not want us to know their identity. The insult was profound, as it reinforced a view that we were not to be trusted with this information, and that it wasn't truly a right, except where our offspring allowed it to be so. By 2015, we once again had a Labor government, and that odious veto was repealed. In light of all of that work, more than 40 years of it, by so very many people who fought so tenaciously for our rights, 18 months ago, Arms and Origins approached Daniel Andrews requesting that he assist us to create a memorial to the separation of our families. Although we offered to raise money to contribute, he most generously offered to fund the whole project. He stepped back and allowed us, the mothers, to create this visual representation of the core of our experience. We worked closely with our sculptor, Anne Ross, to develop an image that spoke for our experience. Anne has taken this commission and our cause to heart and has worked very closely with us to create this beautiful piece of art, which she generously and graciously consented to us naming. This is for us much more than a gift from the government. It is a tangible recognition that our children were untimely ripped from us, destroying our first family and leaving us with a lasting trauma. It confirms that governments of Victoria, on behalf of the community, allowed unjust, cruel and illegal practices to be undertaken on their behalf. It is an ongoing statement that our truth is believed and that we were not given a choice in what happened to our children. It acknowledges us, and it acknowledges our offspring and the lifetime impact of adoption on them and us. It is a healing gesture, and we thank Daniel Andrews and his government for their humanity in providing us with a place that is another step in ameliorating the wrongs of the past. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mari and Elizabeth. Now, before I introduce Minister Mikakos, I'd like to acknowledge some very significant contributors to our journey towards this day. Ted Baillieu, Premier of Victoria from 2010 to 2013, and Julia Gillard, Prime Minister of Australia from 2010 to 2013, both recognised the role of government in the injustices of adoption and were steadfast in their support and in using the authority of government to both acknowledge and make what reparation was available to them. Like them, Daniel Andrews has used the power of government to acknowledge us and our sons and daughters in a very particular way. He took our request on board immediately and with great commitment. His empathy and leadership made this day possible. Pauline Toner was the vanguard in opening all the adoption records. We could never have known what we know now without her incredible perseverance and support. And Christine Campbell took on board what mothers were telling her and contacted every parliamentarian, initiating the inquiry. Jenny Mikakos has been a good friend to our cause. She has supported and promoted our issues in the political environment, not least of which was her election commitment to change the law and remove penalties for parents searching for their sons and daughters. It's with great pleasure that I ask Minister Mikakos to come forward to unveil this beautiful recognition of our journey. Thanks, Jenny.
Well, thank you very much, Jo. Can I begin firstly by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land which we are gathering here. I pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nations and to their elders, both past and present, and acknowledge any elders who are with us here today, and in fact acknowledge all Aboriginal people. To my parliamentary colleagues, to Lizzie Blanthorne, to Danielle Green, to Sue Pennicue, to former colleagues Christine Campbell and Rob Hudson, to federal members of Parliament Jed Carney, Senator Claire Moore, to Lord Mayor Sally Capp, to former Premier Ted Baillieu, to representatives from the many organisations, government and community and not-for-profit who have travelled with us and worked alongside us in our fight for recognition and legislative change. And thank you all very much to everybody here for this important event, the unveiling of the memorial to past adoption practices. And I particularly want to thank Mari for her profound and moving words, and to Elizabeth as well. Those, I think, words have just shaken all of us and reminded us of the cruelty that so many have suffered in the past. I want to pass on the Premier Daniel Andrews' apologies. He very much wanted to be here this afternoon, but unfortunately he's been called to the Prime Minister's Emergency COAG Summit to respond to the drought. However, he asked me that I read out this message on his behalf. 6 years ago, our Parliament finally and formally apologised for the shameful policies and practices of forced adoptions. Although that apology could never undo the damage, it meant that at long last we had confronted one of the darkest chapters in the history of our state and our nation. 6 years on, we unveil a memorial that will stand as a permanent testament to that painful chapter. At the same time, it will serve as an enduring expression of the courage and dignity of so many mothers and their sons and daughters, and a reminder of the strength of those who told their stories and never wavered in their search for truth and justice. We are here today because of your efforts. Now, that last line is particularly important because it wasn't members of Parliament that first spoke out about this, nor were we the first to understand how profoundly we had failed you. Because long before there were any parliamentary apologies or inquiries, there were the mothers, there were the children, the Victorians who stood with them as their allies and their advocates, and your long, long fight to be heard. It's why that day 6 years ago belonged to you, and it's why today also belongs to you. The memorial we're unveiling this afternoon captures in bronze what has been impossible to capture in words. It is a testament to the pain and the suffering that you and your families have endured. But it also serves as a permanent reminder of your courage, your dignity, and your perseverance in the face of that intolerable indifference. 6 years ago, the Victorian Parliament formally apologised to the mothers, fathers, sons and daughters who were profoundly harmed by past adoption practices in Victoria. Today, this memorial has been erected to serve as a reminder of those terrible injustices perpetrated on too many women and their sons and daughters in Victoria and, in fact, Australia-wide, as well as recognising the role of governments in enabling and allowing these practices to occur in the first place. It will be a constant representation of the Victorian government's, the Victorian Parliament's, and in fact the Victorian people's heartfelt sympathies and unreserved apology to all of those harmed, and of our undertaking to never ever forget what happened and to never ever repeat these practices. It also commemorates the Australian Parliament's apology, as well as recognising the role of governments in enabling and allowing these practices to occur. I hope it will become a place for reflection for those affected by past forced adoption, as well as other members of the public and our parliamentarians. Most importantly, I want to acknowledge the tireless work of the representatives of the many organisations here today. And I particularly want to single out Joe and Elizabeth, if I can, because it was in fact these brave, courageous women who came to see me back in 2014, and I was very proud that our first bill that we passed, the first bill that I passed as Minister was in fact the bill that has in fact been referred to already. I also wish to acknowledge the tremendous work of former Premier Ted Baillieu, who is with us here today and who did so much to make the 2012 apology by the Victorian Parliament possible. Thank you, Ted. As has already been acknowledged, I too want to acknowledge Lizzie Blanthorne for her advocacy on behalf of so many of you here today. Can I also acknowledge Lord Mayor Sally Capp, who joins us here today as well. And I'd like to thank the City of Melbourne for partnering with the Victorian Government to make this important memorial a reality, and the opportunity this space presents as a place for quiet reflection and remembrance. I'd also like to acknowledge the unique and disproportionate impact of child removal policies on Aboriginal Victorians through the stolen generations. As we know, the stolen generations are the generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children who were removed from their families and communities across the states and territories of Australia as a result of past government policies, including forced adoption policies. The removal of Aboriginal children across Australia was motivated by racial discrimination, and it broke important cultural, spiritual and family ties. And this was recognised through the Stolen Generations marker in Fitzroy, unveiled in May of this year. That marker was developed by the City of Yarra and local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities with financial support from the Victorian Government, and the marker pays tribute to and honours the first-hand and intergenerational impacts of the stolen generations, whilst acknowledging the resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I want to join other speakers here today in paying tribute to the artist who created the memorial sculpture, and that is Anne Ross. Anne has worked closely with advocacy organisations including Arms and Origins Victoria and people affected by past adoptions. And as we will see shortly, the memorial sculpture depicts a mother and her 2 children, a young girl and a male toddler who were taken from her at birth. It reflects the fractured relationship between the mother and her children over their lifetimes as a result of forced adoption, and the fact that they may never know each other. The sculpture in a very powerful way reflects the impact of past adoption policies on all affected family members, as reflected by words engraved in the ripples on the ground to describe the relatives affected. The title of the artwork, Taken Not Given, was selected by stakeholder organisations to emphasise the babies who were removed against their mother's will. And it reminds us all that this must never happen again. So in a few minutes we will see the formal unveiling, and of course you will also have the opportunity for those affected by these past forced adoption practices to be invited to place a flower on the memorial. I know nothing I say or do here can ever ease the pain and hurt in your hearts. But I hope that this memorial, which gives you a place to reflect and remember, can be a part of the healing process. Thank you once again for being here this afternoon.
Arms and Origins say in a most heartfelt way, thank you, Jenny Makakos and Daniel Andrews and the Victorian Government for your support and acknowledgement, and for taking up our idea with such energy and commitment. We appreciate your words, Jenny, and we are grateful for your acknowledgement and for the resources that you and your government have made available to allow this remembrance to take place. Mention should also be made of the staff in DPC and the Premier's office and Jenny Makakos' office, who worked very hard to ensure a successful event and tried extremely hard to keep us happy, which sometimes was not so easy. I would also like to make reference to Naam Mushin, who has been a stalwart and incredibly supportive of our cause, state and federally, and we appreciate hugely the effort that you've made for us as well. I now invite anyone who would like to mark how adoption has touched you and your family to come forward and take a stem of Boronia from one of the vases. Oh, no I don't, sorry. Take that back. Now I would like to ask Faye Cuff, Lynn Kinghorn, Christine and Elizabeth to unveil the memorial. And we will be doing that, the flower tribute, to the beautiful backdrop of Lily Thornton playing the cello for us. This is lovely, isn't it? Now I invite anybody who would like to come and take a stem of Boronia from one of the vases laid at our sculpture, Taken Not Given, and to the beautiful backdrop of Lily Thornton. And following that, I will invite Sally Cap to speak. It's been quite a journey to find a home for this wonderful work of art. The City of Melbourne has worked closely with the project to provide this beautiful space for us, for which we're very grateful. It's with great pleasure that I welcome the Lord Mayor of the City of Melbourne, Sally Capp.
I'm going to start. It's a pleasure to be here, and I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I think I'm expressing the emotion that comes from a number of things. Obviously from the amazing stories that we've heard this afternoon in the experiences that so many mothers and families had during such an uncaring and cruel time in our history. I also respect the journey that you've all been on and the legislative change and parliamentary the support that's got us to the point where we are today. But I think also looking around this group, I feel very grateful to be a mother who was able to raise her children, and I'm crying with you and for you for the unimaginable loss and devastation that you have been through. So I'd like to acknowledge you all. So I am supposed to say, I welcome you all, community leaders, families and friends. Obviously this is not an easy day for you, and there have been lots of not easy days for you. But in this city that I love and that we all love, we hope that we can bring you many days of warmth and compassion by having this memorial here. Words never can be equal to your sense of loss, not just your sense of loss, your loss. But this green space, this place, is dedicated to you for reflection and a reminder that we have learnt lessons from our past and that you have worked so hard to create a better future for those that came later, for people like me. So thank you. It's our hope that the peace that you may find here and the comfort that will flow from these gardens and from this absolutely stunning sculpture will help you and will help all of us. Under these trees is a place to remember, to rest, to meditate and to perhaps find some form of peace. I know from reading and hearing your stories that young parents were told to forget the child, as if that were ever possible. To the families and the people most directly affected, may I tell you that on behalf of the City of Melbourne and on behalf of the people of Melbourne, that this wonderful sculpture and this reserve attributes to you as mothers, to your children, to the fathers and to the families that have been so deeply impacted, and to the pain that was caused, and to the grief that you have carried throughout your lives. And thank you for your bravery in telling your stories and fighting the fight. This is our city's way of saying that you are in our thoughts, you are in our hearts, and we value you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The City of Melbourne has taken this project of ours into a bigger vision. They are going to, at a later date, make a water feature up the other end of the reserve with an amphitheatre in front of it, which will provide a place for people to reflect on the ways in which societies change and governments reflect that change. It's a courageous government that acts when people speak, and it is a reminder that we the community, that we can make our voices heard. I'd just also like to tell you that we've had postcards made as a memorial of the memorial. It's a photo, obviously, of the beautiful artwork, and then on the back it has the words of the plaque, which I would like Lily, please, to unveil. Sorry. I'd like Mari Meggett to unveil it. It says, thank you, Taken, Not Given, Anne Ross, 2018. This artwork remembers the mothers and children who were separated by forced adoptions. It acknowledges the loss and pain that this created, a lifetime of grief for us, the mothers, the loss of birthright for our sons and daughters. The right to love and care for our children was taken from us, and the harm inflicted is irreparable. Following a damning Commonwealth Senate inquiry, the Victorian State Government took steps towards ameliorating this shameful legacy by offering an unreserved apology, unveiled on 26th of October 2018. And they are available on the table over there for anybody who'd like to take one. Thank you. Now, it's no coincidence that the unveiling of Taken Not Given is today. On the 25th of October 2012, the Victorian Government apologised to those impacted by past forced adoption practices, making yesterday the 6th anniversary of the apology. Ted Baillieu said in part on that day, "To the mothers and fathers who were denied the opportunity to love and care for your children and for the pain and trauma you experienced, we are deeply sorry. For the sons and daughters for whom adoption meant continual anxiety, uncertainty, and the deprivation of a natural family connection, we offer our sincere apology." The then leader of the opposition, Daniel Andrews, said, "I am sorry, we are sorry, truly, truly sorry." However, words alone can't heal wounds. This recognition of how people's lives were affected will hopefully be of comfort and help in the healing process. Saudade is a Portuguese word meaning a deep emotional state of nostalgia or profound melancholic longing for an absent something or someone that one loves. It can be described as an emptiness, as if someone or something that should be there in a particular moment is missing, and the individual feels the absence. But this is not a memorial for one moment in time. The young mother is standing with an empty arm, depicting the baby that she lost. However, it is not just a baby that was lost, but a whole childhood. Indeed, perhaps a whole lifetime. The children were not forgotten by us. There's always a connection, albeit fractured. The ripple effect of adoption is represented by the elements at the mother's feet, showing various people that are affected by adoption, the wider community. We hope that this will be a space where all people can come and reflect in peace, hope and tranquility. And on behalf of Arms and Origins and all those affected by adoption, I want to thank Anne Ross, who is somewhere. Who, if she could come forward, please. Anne is the creator of this beautiful artwork. Anne's passion and her integrity and her resolve to do us proud are appreciated by us beyond measure. So thank you, Anne. We really do appreciate your hard work. And thank you to the Victorian Government for making this possible, and to all of you for your support in joining us today. Please feel free to enjoy Melbourne's newest artwork, and then join us for afternoon tea in the Treasury Theatre, where we will be entertained by music from the Thornberrys. So thank you very much for attending today.